Hello, it's me, Christine. Welcome to my little crime corner. I know some people grew up with the expectation that when the time came, they would become the caregivers for their parents or grandparents in whatever capacity. This might have been discussed, or there might have been an unspoken understanding. Sometimes, not always, there is a will, and in that will, different things are left or promised to different family members, depending on a lot of things. In some instances, the one who cares for someone may receive something above someone else. It all depends on a person's wishes about what happens to their estate when they pass. I've covered several cases here on my channel, and I'm sure you're familiar with many more where someone is on track to receive an inheritance or a hefty insurance payout, but just can't seem to be patient and let nature take its course. We unfortunately have another case like that today, and you may or may not be surprised at the lengths someone will go to get what they feel is owed to them just a little bit sooner. We are in Chicago, Illinois today to meet a man named Charles Albanese. Charles was born on June 13th, 1937, to Michael and Clara Albanese. He had a younger brother named Michael, and by all accounts, the brothers got along. Not a lot is known about Charles's early life, but several school acquaintances have had the same things to say about him. They would recall that he was a spoiled brat who always wanted to be a big shot. He wasn't one not to have big dreams, though, being described as an ambitious young man who wanted to earn as much money doing as little work as possible. At 21, Charles had gotten married and started his own family. In the following 6 years, he and his wife would have 3 children. Charles's first known crime occurred on February 1st, 1965, when he was 27 years old. He and an unidentified accomplice had targeted an elderly bus driver, breaking into his home and stealing $160 from him. Less than a week later, he was caught as a neighbor was diligent in keeping an eye on the comings and goings of the neighborhood and had the foresight to record the car's license plate. This was easily and quickly traced back to Charles, who was positively identified by the homeowner as one of the burglars. Soon after, Charles was indicted by a grand jury for armed robbery, as well as several counts of auto theft. For this, he was convicted and given a sentence of 5 years of probation. After being convicted, his wife served him with divorce papers and moved from Illinois to Wisconsin, taking the couple's 3 daughters with her. Not long after, Charles got married a second time and had a child with his new wife, but not much else is known of this relationship. It apparently wasn't all that meaningful to Charles, as he met and married a woman named Virginia Mueller in Las Vegas over Labor Day weekend in 1972, while still legally married to his second wife. Eventually, the divorce with his second wife was settled in late 1972, but this wouldn't be the end of their court battles. In the following years, she would file 2 more complaints against him, one of them in 1977 for his refusal to pay child support, and another for non-support of a petition filed in Chicago in 1980. Charles didn't let his legal trouble get him down, as he and Virginia appeared to be living a happy, comfortable life. At this time, Charles had been employed as the president of a company called Allied Die Casting, which made trophies and plaques, stuff like that, and was owned by Charles's father, Michael Sr. Charles's younger brother, Michael Jr., also worked at the company. In 1978, Charles and Virginia moved with their 2 daughters to nearby Spring Grove, and his neighbors had a lot of similar things to say about him as his childhood friends. very flashy and showy, and would go out of his way to flaunt his wealth. Now, it's not a crime to be flashy, to each his own. If that makes you feel good and important, you do you. His neighbors would recall him as having several luxury cars and would frequently take vacations to Florida and Jamaica. Very tropical, very flash. He did seem to be living beyond his means, as he had two Cadillacs that had been leased by the Allied Die Casting Company, and Charles said he was not able to live off of the $110,000 he was making a year. He didn't make changes to his spending, though. He just kept getting more and more into debt. In July of 1980, Charles began experiencing serious economic problems. He was behind on his mortgage payments and was 6 months behind on his child support payments to his first wife. He owed $15,000 to the State Bank of Richmond, which was due on August 14th. Due date's coming up soon, better figure something out. That same year, Charles made frequent trips to Fox Lake, where his mother in law, 69-year-old Marion Mueller, lived with her mother, 87-year-old Mary Lambert, in the Leisure Village retirement community. Charles was the perfect son in law and grandson in law. Marion and Mary were always pleased to see him, and aside from Virginia, he was pretty much their only other visitor. Whenever Charles came by, they were always very excited. Charles would never come by without bringing something for them. He would bring them gifts like jewelry and other small, thoughtful trinkets, and would always eat with them in the facility's dining room. The women loved spending time with him and were thankful that someone would care so much and would put in so much effort to come and visit them and take care of them. However, these visits would soon take a turn. Charles started slow, but gradually planted the seed and was able to convince Mary to turn over all of her financial assets to Marion, leaving her other two children out of her will completely. Marion, of course, would leave everything to Virginia and Charles. After all, Charles really loved them and was doing his best to take care of them. Once all of the financial aspects of these women's affairs were in order, Charles did the unthinkable and put his sinister plan into action. He ended up contacting an operator of a metal plating company in Wisconsin that he already had somewhat of a relationship with. He had sold scrap zinc to them in the past and asked him what would be the most effective method of getting rid of pests in his home. The man recommended Charles get some arsenic, and he told him how to use it. Over the next few months, he slowly began adding it to Marion and Mary's food. On August 3rd, Marion and Mary came over to the Albany's home for Sunday dinner. That night, they were having Polish sausage and sauerkraut. On Tuesday, Mary was feeling so sick that the staff at Leisure Village had called an ambulance, and she was rushed to the emergency room. She was experiencing diarrhea and violently vomiting for more than 48 hours. Her condition worsened, and on August 6th, she passed away at the hospital. Her official cause of death was listed as natural causes. When she died, she had named Marion and Virginia as her heirs. The following day, Virginia had closed out her grandmother's accounts and transferred $3,600 to her and Charles's joint account. On August 8th, while on the way to Mary's funeral, Charles ended up getting arrested for his failure to pay child support. He was released when it was made clear that he would be making the payments. It was revealed that on August 4th, he had sent his ex-wife's lawyer a post-dated check for $3,648 and sent a note saying that the check was dated August 15th because he was expecting a deposit in his account on the 13th. In addition to this check, Charles also sent another post-dated check for $500. Marion began feeling very sick on the evening of the 3rd, but her symptoms at first were not as violent, but that didn't stay that way for long. Her health had began to rapidly decline, and the Leisure Village staff had her transported to St. Teresa's Hospital on August 16th, where she passed away 2 days later. Her official cause of death was listed as a heart attack. On August 20th, money that was held in a joint account for Marion and Virginia was transferred to Charles and Virginia's joint account. Virginia received an insurance payout of $6,000 and a pension fund after her mother's death, and the money was used towards her and Charles's mortgage payments, which they were very behind on. The State Bank of Richmond had already granted Charles 2 extensions on the note, which was due on August 14th, because Charles told the bank that he would be able to make the payment soon, as he had some real estate that he was trying to sell. In October, Virginia had inherited the Leisure Village condo that Mary and Marion had shared, and Charles and Virginia were able to sell it for $50,000. $20,000 of that was deposited into their joint account, and a $15,000 payment was made to the bank. The 2 deaths being so close together and the symptoms being pretty much the same made the community very concerned that there was a possible water contamination in the area, and the health department was called in to run tests on the village's water supply. The Lake County Health Department then launched a full-scale investigation into the community's sewage systems, as well as the area's restaurants, and all tests returned negative for any contaminants. Because nothing suspicious turned up in these tests, and there being no new deaths or illnesses similar to Mary or Marion's, life in the community slowly returned to normal. It was around this time that Marion and Mary's estates, totaling around $150,000, were transferred in full to Virginia. This was a very full few weeks for the family, having tragedy after tragedy. The stress only continued when Charles had gotten into an argument with his father, and on September 4th, he said he did not want him in his company anymore. Remember, Charles was working as the president of his father's company. A few days later, presumably after cooling off, Michael Sr. somewhat changed his mind about removing Charles altogether and instead demoted him to the company treasurer. This seemed to be a good common ground solution, and everybody appeared happy with these new changes. On September 8th, Michael Jr. began eating his lunch at work. It should be noted that he had left his sandwich in his office prior to lunch. Just an hour after eating, Michael began experiencing extreme nausea and began vomiting. It had gotten so severe that Michael ended up going to the hospital later that day. After spending several days in the hospital and being monitored, he was discharged on the 13th and seemed to be feeling better. However, the very next day, about 2 hours after he had had his lunch, he began experiencing the same symptoms as the week before and returned to the hospital. He was not hospitalized for several days this time, but his doctor had decided to place him on a bland diet, as he thought at this point that he was clearly eating something that was not agreeing with him, and he didn't know what it was. It could be something as simple as pepper or another aspect of his diet. Whatever it was clearly serious, as he was back in the hospital. The most logical explanation that the doctor had was that Michael probably had an ulcer and the bland diet was key to alleviate his pain and symptoms. To help him keep up with his new bland diet, Michael's wife began preparing him lunches to bring to work. The bland diet seemed to be working for him, as Michael wasn't really feeling sick at all and hadn't gone back to the hospital for several months. That was until February 21st, 1981, when Michael opened up his thermos to eat the pea soup that his wife had prepared for him. He remembers taking the thermos out of his bag and setting it on his desk while he left midday to attend an appointment with his doctor. He was excited to inform his doctor that the bland diet was working for him, and he felt that this possible ulcer was gone and that he would be able to discontinue this bland diet. After he returned to work and started eating his lunch, his father came in to talk to him. Charles noticed this from another office and walked over to try and get his father to leave the room, urging him to let Michael finish eating. Michael would later say that he only ended up eating half of the soup because it tasted funny. Michael then went into the computer room and resumed his work for the day. After a short time, he began to feel sick again and thought it best that he left the office. On his drive home, he had to pull over on the side of the road where he threw up several times. Once he got home, the vomiting intensified and continued on through the night. The following morning, he called his doctor and explained his symptoms. His doctor said he needed to be hospitalized immediately, and several tests were performed that day. Michael was discharged from the hospital on March 13th, but his condition was still very serious. In addition to the illness he was experiencing, he also had numbness in his hands and feet and had very severe nerve damage to the point where he wasn't able to do simple tasks such as walking and dressing himself, and he certainly wouldn't be able to carry on his normal business activities. Michael continued to be in a lot of pain and was having an exceedingly difficult time sleeping through the night. Even though Michael's wife had already rinsed out the thermos several days prior, when tested, results revealed the presence of arsenic. While in the hospital, Michael's tests revealed that he did not have an ulcer, as previously thought. It was shown that he had received sublethal doses of arsenic over a period of several months, and that the poisoning was causing severe nerve damage. Remember how he was finding himself unable to do simple tasks and having numbness all over? This certainly explained that. As Michael's condition improved, he was able to return to work again, this time with the help of leg braces. He was doing his best to continue working, despite being in excruciating pain and having difficulty completing his tasks. Michael Sr. kept a cookie jar at his desk and would often eat cookies while he worked. In mid-March, he began having the same symptoms as his son, but not as severe. That is until April 21st, when he became so ill, he was hospitalized. Although his condition was not improving, he was released from the hospital after just a few days. In addition to violent spouts of vomiting, he began feeling numbness in his hands and feet, just like his son, and sought the help of a neurologist for testing, which demonstrated some sensory nerve deficit. Michael Sr. was hospitalized for the last time on May 9th. His condition was worsening, and he was in so much pain from constantly vomiting. The pain of his hands and feet being constantly numb was becoming unbearable, and his condition gradually deteriorated. On May 15th, Charles had called his father's attorney, a Mr. Fishbein, early at his home. He explained that his father's conditioning was worsening, and after speaking with his doctors, he told him that he wasn't expected to live very much longer, and that he should prepare an amendment to the Allied Die Casting Corporation's agreement as soon as possible, and that he should get to the hospital. Charles and Michael Jr. visited their father in the hospital later that day, and the three of them signed an amendment to the shareholder agreement. The agreement then made Charles the vice president of the company. Michael Sr. was in excruciating pain and ended up signing the agreement while strapped to his hospital bed. Michael Jr. was in a wheelchair and had already suffered so much nerve damage to his hands. His wife had to help him sign the agreement. The following morning, Michael Sr. had passed away. A forensic chemist named Joerg Pearl came to the hospital to collect samples of his hair and fingernails, and after completing his tests, put in his report that Michael's death was caused by arsenic poisoning. He could tell by his hair sample that sublethal doses were administered over a 4-month period, and a large lethal dose was administered right before his death. When tested, lab tests revealed the presence of arsenic in the crumbs at the bottom of his cookie jar. Charles said that he had eaten cookies from the cookie jar several times, including after his father's death. Charles was not able to explain how he had not gotten sick when his father and his brother had. It was also odd that the cookie jar was left at Michael Sr.'s desk, and why Charles continued to walk into his father's office whenever he wanted a cookie. When asked why he didn't just take the cookie jar into his office, he said there wasn't any room on his desk. Does anybody else find it weird that he had no problem going in and out of his deceased father's office and eating, or allegedly eating, these cookies? By the way, there is no evidence that he actually consumed anything from the cookie jar. He only said he did. It's also telling that he didn't want the cookie jar in his office, maybe because he thought there might be a reason that he would get sick. When examined, there were 3 sets of fingerprints detected on the cookie jar. One was Michael Jr., and another set belonged to Charles. There was also a set from a third person who could not be conclusively identified. Michael Sr. had never been fingerprinted in his life, so it would have been thought that these prints must have been his. That would definitely be my best guess. His body was then exhumed, but his fingers were unfortunately too decomposed to pull any fingerprints. So this third set remains a mystery, but again, it is my very best guess that the third set of fingerprints did in fact belong to Michael Sr. It would make sense, after all, they were at his desk, it was his cookie jar in his office. Third set, his son's. After Michael Sr.'s death and Michael Jr. being pretty much confined to his home, Charles ended up being in sole control of the Allied Die Casting Corporation. Since his financial situation was still in a very dire state, he began selling scrap metal and zinc, which was the company's property, to J.W. Reichel and Sons and to Clearing Smelting Corporation. In all, Charles sold 88,000 pounds of scrap zinc and $9,300 worth of scrap metal in these transactions. Charles insisted that these payments be either cash or checks made out to him personally. He made it clear that he would not accept a check made out to the business. Over the course of several weeks, Charles would sell more scrap metal and zinc and would make nearly $40,000 for these transactions. In November, once the police had started investigating his family's mysterious deaths and making frequent visits to the Allied Die Casting Corporation, Charles called his contact at Clearing Smelting and told him, "If anybody calls regarding any of our transactions, you know nothing of it." If you recall, no autopsy was done on Virginia's mother or grandmother. Their official causes of death were listed as a heart attack and natural causes, but Michael Sr. was by all accounts healthy, and he had been violently ill on and off for several months. Something had to have been making him sick. One time can easily be explained as having, maybe a stomach bug, but dozens of hospitalizations due to the same thing, something is going on here. Something is being added to his environment. He is around something different, or he's consuming something different. Whatever it is, this is not natural causes. During Michael Sr.'s autopsy, the coroner, Alvin Querhammer, discovered traces of arsenic in his blood. We already knew this based on the results from the tests that were performed at the hospital right after his death. Alvin then contacted the coroner from Lake County, Robert Babcock, who had investigated the deaths of Mary and Marion the previous year after he realized they all had a connection to the same family. The coroners worked together and were able to get permission from Virginia to exhume her mother and grandmother. On August 13th, 1981, Mary was exhumed, and a few weeks later, on August 31st, so was Marion. Both women had an autopsy performed, and the results were shocking. It was shocking at the time to the coroner, but it's probably not going to be shocking to you, since you have been following along very well. Mary had close to 8 times the normal amount of arsenic in her body. I know, what is normal, right? But there was no way for that amount to be in her body under normal circumstances. Testing revealed that Marion had more than 5 times the normal concentration of arsenic. The forensic chemist had concluded that both women's cause of death was ultimately due to massive doses of arsenic. After learning about this, the McHenry police chief ordered a background check on all the members of the Albanese family. As they looked into the family, they quickly narrowed in on Charles. He had a criminal record, and it didn't take them long to discover that he had motives for committing each crime, and found that he was in communication with an employee at the metal plating company who had sold him the arsenic. While investigating Charles, police had ended up speaking to a travel agent that frequently worked with the Albanese family and would assist them with booking vacations. They learned from her that Charles had another trip to Jamaica planned for right around Thanksgiving time, and this time, his mother Clara was to come along. Police feared that she was his possible next target, as her wealth exceeded $500,000. Police felt this was certainly motive, and on November 18th, 1981, they arrested Charles at his office. Once taken into custody, he was charged with the murders of his father, Michael Sr., his mother-in-law, Marion, and his grandmother-in-law, Mary. He was also charged with the attempted murder of his brother, Michael Jr., as well as the lesser charge of stealing company stock. Charles would be tried in 2 separate trials since the murders occurred in 2 different counties. One was to take place in Lake County for the murder of his grandmother-in-law, Mary, his father, Michael Sr., and the attempted murder of his brother, Michael Jr. During his trial, he pleaded innocent to all charges. The second trial was held in McHenry County for the murder of his mother-in-law, Marion. The first trial was scheduled for May 1982. After the jury had deliberated for 7 hours, they had found Charles guilty on all counts. The prosecution had sought the death penalty, saying that he deserved to die because he had shown no remorse. 2 days later, Charles was sentenced to die by electric chair. As the judge read his sentence, Charles showed no emotion. Later that year in October, his second trial for the murder of his mother-in-law Marion began. He denied responsibility for this and claimed it was either his brother or a random killer who had carried out the murders, but it certainly wasn't him. At the trial, Charles admitted that he had written a letter in prison that attempted to implicate his brother Michael in the poisoning deaths, and that he had someone mail copies of the letter to his mother, his wife, his uncle, and the supervisor at the Allied Die Casting Corporation. The letter was admitted to evidence and stated, Joe Reichel and Charles's brother Mike, he used me to kill those people and set up Charles. The containers Joe gave Charles had powdered sugar and a little arsenic, just enough to get rid of animals. Michael almost took too much by trying to make himself look like a victim. The police followed the clues just as we set them up. Mike set up the phony theft. Now they tried to double cross me. That was their first and last mistake they ever made. The document examiner, Joseph J. Leake, then gave testimony concerning the letter. He testified that it was written by Charles, but that he had tried to conceal his handwriting, so it would appear that it was written by somebody else. Charles was not able to adequately explain why he had attempted to falsify such a letter and then admit in open court that he had written it. Charles's defense had said that Michael Sr. had gotten arsenic poisoning because he had consumed an octopus meal shortly before entering the hospital. The package of octopus was somehow able to be retrieved, and lab tests revealed that the arsenic in the octopus was within normal, non-lethal levels. Arsenic is often found in trace amounts in many food items and in every person. I know this sounds scary, but you are fine. It would take far more than these trace amounts to make anyone sick. His attorney had made a motion to dismiss all the charges due to circumstantial evidence, but ultimately was unsuccessful. On October 26th, Charles was convicted of Marion's murder and days later was once again sentenced to death. In addition to his death sentences, he was also given a 60-year sentence for the attempted murder of his brother, Michael Jr., and a 5-year sentence for 2 counts of theft. At the time of the trial, Michael Jr. was still having difficulty using his hands as the nerve damage had left permanent effects. Over the several years Charles had sat on death row, he had attempted to have his sentence appealed and his convictions overturned. None of these requests were successful. He was set to be executed on September 20th, 1995, at the Stateville Correctional Center in Crest Hill, Illinois. For his last meal, he requested prime rib, a baked potato, garlic bread, coffee, Coca-Cola, and pistachio ice cream. He didn't have a final statement. He simply said thank you to the warden before being executed via lethal injection. Up until the end, he continued to profess his innocence and accused authorities of covering up facts of the case. Can you believe this greedy, greedy guy? All he had to do was live within his means and not steal from his family's company. He would have been next in line to inherit the business if he wasn't doing all this shady stuff. Also, he took his wife's mother and grandmother away from her. And for what? The lengths he was willing to go through to essentially wipe out his whole family for money. If police hadn't spoken to their travel agent, I definitely believe his mother Clara would have been his next victim. He definitely did not feel remorseful and felt no guilt in doing what he was doing. Especially poisoning people, this is such a cruel and excruciating way to die. Just a totally heartless individual. I am very eager to hear your thoughts on this one. And that is all I have for you today. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned something. and I will see you in the next one. Bye.